Right. So the next section we're going to talk about is going to be about Trump, and I really don't like spending a whole lot of time on this. This is going to be somewhat of a quick section because I really do think Trump is just a product of the political right, and I'm afraid that people are going to be like, well, once we get rid of Trump, whether we do out, live out a second term or get or reelect or vote him out, that everything's going to be normal and good. When in reality, like, Trump is just an amplification of all the rhetoric and the racial dog whistles and the politics of hate that's been going on in this country for since the rise of the modern Republican Party in the 50s. So even beforehand, it was going on, but it wasn't, it was called Republicans, but the modern version of it. And I think his quote by John A. Powell, summarizes it so well. He says, "Trump is not a descendant of Lincoln; he's a descendant of Jefferson Davis." So Jefferson Davis was the leader of the Confederacy, and a lot of times people will make this like false, assumption that because the Republican Party, which started with Lincoln, is the same party that that created Trump. When in reality, it couldn't be more opposite. We talked about the first section of the political realignment that's happened in the last half century. So I'm going to play this quick frontline video on Divided States of America. This is a really great show. It's a 2-hour-long documentary. If you really want to understand a lot of things behind the transition from Obama to Trump, it does a really great job. But I'm going to just play you a quick clip of how Trump, of Trump getting started.
Clean it out, start new, bottom up, top down.
In New York City, at Trump Tower, Donald Trump had watched the unrest in the GOP and was about to make his move.
Trump watches the defeat of Eric Cantor in 2014. He sees the rising unrest on the right, and he sees an opportunity.
Donald Trump entered the field pretty late in June of 2015 and did so in what would be quintessential Trumpian fashion.
He had risen to political prominence, questioning the president's legitimacy, and now wanted the presidency for himself. He figures out that there is a white working class constituency who see Republican leaders as having been accommodationists or, in Trump's estimation, just weak.
It's hard to explain the Trump phenomenon without explaining the fact that Donald Trump was willing to go where previous leaders wouldn't go in terms of arousing people against each other and appealing to their darker sides.
The Republican establishment had embraced immigration reform. But as he announced his candidacy, Trump would go in the opposite direction.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best.
There is a single issue that Trump seizes on that represents this gap between the grassroots was and elites like Paul Ryan. It is undoubtedly immigration.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Donald Trump, having used the birther issue to his effect, suddenly looks out there and sees that if he gets to the right of everybody else in a bombastic fashion on immigration, he emerges as first among equals.
When do we beat Mexico at the border? They're laughing at us, at our stupidity.
Trump's advisors had prepared him to take advantage of the anger over the airwaves and on the internet.
They had been listening to thousands of hours of talk radio, and so they built this whole campaign message around trade and immigration. And so when Trump descended that stairwell, he had already pinpointed the issue that was going to define the race.
I would build a great wall, and nobody builds walls better than me, believe me. And I'll build them very inexpensively.
His rhetoric got him attention and fueled his rise.
Donald Trump was a great candidate for some of those platforms like talk radio and some of the websites because he gave content. He talked about illegal immigration in the way they had been doing it for years.
How stupid are our leaders? How stupid are these politicians to allow this to happen? How stupid
Trump promised that he could do what the Republican establishment failed to do.
He's an outsider, and he can say, don't blame me for that mess. I'm the one who can go in and fix it.
We will make America great again. Thank you. Thank you very much.
cannot be laconic to an electorate that is mad as hell. And for tens of millions of Americans, that willingness to fight political correctness and not back down told them that he was the only candidate who would really blow things up in Washington.
I'll tell you what I like about him. He doesn't take any crap from Obama.
He's the leader right now of the entire conservative movement in America.
Donald Trump has changed the entire debate on immigration.
The very next evening, the president was once.
And you wonder why, Rush Limbaugh, Donald Trump gave Rush Limbaugh the Medal of Honor. I mean, I don't think that he would even be president if it wasn't for the rhetoric that they've been spewing for decades that paved the way for the people ready to not only accept Trump, but also vote for him. So if you look at, Trump has a long history of racism, particularly around his housing. He has lots of housing discrimination lawsuits. He's notorious for not renting to Black people. The Central Park 5, really horrific story. Check out the Netflix movie, but it's basically 5, Black kids were framed for a rape, and he, jumped on board and brought a full-scale art. Actually, you did a full page calling for their death, even before they were, found guilty. Eventually they found they were innocent. But I can't even imagine, like, in the documentary on Netflix, it talks about, the parents of those kids and what they might, they're going through when they saw Trump calling for the death penalty for their children who were framed. And then he's the one that really started the birther movement. Obama wasn't born in this country, and he was, it's like dehumanized, delegitimized, ization that wouldn't occur if Obama wasn't Black. I mean, this was, definitely a strategy that only works for Black people in a white supremacy society. Is like delegitimizing their accomplishness and their success. And then his platform. I mean, I'm not going to spend too much time, but it was a pretty racist platform right to the get-go, from like banning Muslims, immigrants, to military deportation of 11 million immigrants. He talked about doing, like the old style, like Eisenhower's, mass deportations that were horrific. We'll talk about in another class. Calling Latinx immigrants rapists and drug dealers. All different kinds of things. National stop and frisk policy. Saying there's a war on police. Really just a very racist platform right from the get-go. And then you see the first 2 years just from Islamophobia, the travel bans. From white nationalism. Supporting all these, the rise of these white nationalists that we're going to talk about in the next section, another section. Appointing white nationalists as senior advisors, from Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon. Enormous amount of racism against Latinx immigrants. There's zero policy that really basically kidnapping and tearing apart children from their parents and just traumatizing them. There's a really horrific article, but it's worth reading about how that, Steve, Bannon, or Stephen Miller, that and how they decided on a zero tolerance policy. It was like the leader of the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, was there, and this meeting was basically like, we're going to need years to figure out programs and how to reunite the parents and all that stuff. And they were just like, we're doing it. They had a raise a hand vote and decided that the kids started basically to start kidnapping these children with no policy to actually reunite them. It's pretty horrific. Fear mongering about migrant caravans that caused all kinds of white supremacist massacres in 2008 election. Racism towards Black people. From calling all Black players protesting police brutality as SOBs, encouraging police brutality. He gave this big speech about, basically encouraging that police brutality at this law enforcement convention. Tons of racist quotes and stuff. Like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on this, on Trump. We're all living it still to this day, so we're pretty aware. These last 2 years, from basically, trying to say Black Lives Matter is a symbol of hate to threatening funding from blue cities. They're allowing, they aren't like brutalizing protesters, sending in Department of Homeland Security agents, unmarked agents to like snatch protesters and interrogate them in unmarked vans. I mean, you can literally look like Boogaloo and Proud Boy are both white nationalist terrorists, and they look exactly the same as the people snatching the protesters off the street. It's insane. Like, the idea, like that Tea Party video when they're like, oh, I believe, Obama's trampling the Constitution. That is insane. Like that these people are silent right now. And that just shows that it has nothing to do with the Constitution. It has everything to do with race. Just all different kinds of things happening right now. That's pretty, horrific. And that's not even mentioning the pandemic. We'll get to that in a second. And you just see a long list of these like senior advisors. They're all like white supremacists, whether they're devout white supremacists like Sebastian Gorka actually like wore this like Nazi, it's Hungarian Nazi nationalist group symbol during the speech, or a lot of like anti-immigrant, hate group, leaders getting positions and immigration positions, Steve Bannon and Steve Miller. And then the scary part is just federal judges right now. And I did this slide last year, so it's even worse now. And especially with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat is about to go to an ultra-conservative judge. But you just look at, the amount of judges that Trump's got appointed. And a lot of that is because they refused to appoint Obama judges for the last 2 years of Obama's administration. So there's a lot of openings that were filled by Trump. And that's the things that we're going to, they're going to continue this hateful rhetoric of they're going to be ruling on civil rights issues for the next generation. And I want to play this clip on Stephen Miller because he's most of these white supremacists, most of the people in Trump administrations that have been either like fired or convicted of crimes, but Stephen Miller is like one of the people that's still with him, and he's probably arguably one of the more dangerous people that's in administration right now. So I'm going to play this quick clip on him.
Stephen Miller, he basically politicized the Department of Homeland Security. But from day one of his time in the White House, he narrowed the focus to become a political tool for Donald Trump, as I show in the book. And, he did this by securing, during the campaign, he secured for Trump the very critical Border Patrol union endorsement. The Border Patrol had never endorsed a presidential candidate before. And Stephen Miller, as I show in the book, promised them a direct line to the White House, a direct role in shaping immigration policy if they endorsed Donald Trump. And so you saw them endorse Donald Trump. And this is why you see a disproportionate impact on families. The Border Patrol at the time was very upset about, the influx of families from Central America. They no longer felt that they had, the same role of warriors and vanguards at the border, cracking down on criminals and cartels. And so they wanted someone who was going to really go after, keep families from coming to the United States at all. And this is, this is why this is how Stephen Miller made himself a key player for the Trump team, by getting him those endorsements. These are eugenicists who believe in the genetic superiority of whites, who believe in population control for non-white people, and who funded these groups that, as I show in my book, Hate Monger, Stephen Miller pulled policies directly from these groups, and this is what shapes the immigration policy. You mentioned the naturalization ceremony that took place at the RNC last night, and that's really meant to create this dichotomy, this false dichotomy between legal and illegal immigration that does not exist in the Trump administration. The Trump administration likes to say that they're going after criminals and cartels, and that's what the RNC was meant to convey. But if you look at the person who is crafting immigration policy for President Trump, it's Stephen Miller, and Stephen Miller primarily has been targeting families from Africa, families from Latin America, and mostly people who have broken no laws, asylum seekers, refugees, restricting green card access. And if you look at why, and if you connect the dots between what he's doing and his influences, as I try to do in the book, it becomes clear that for Stephen Miller, this is not about national security. This is not about keeping out criminals. This is about re-engineering the ethnic flows into this country to keep brown and black families out, because he was radicalized at a very young age in this belief that you now see permeating the Republican Party, and that you see Trump promoting this belief that brown and black people pose some kind of existential threat to America. You know, Stephen Miller, as I show in the book, at a very young age, you know, as when he was a teenager, going through a difficult time in his life, came into contact with multiple extremists who introduced him to this fantasy that he had to save the country from, you know, the Democratic Party partnering with Muslims, Mexicans, and other people of color who he, you know, because he was exposed to misleading crime statistics like the ones that they put out systematically now that paint brown and black people as somehow innately more violent than white people. He was radicalized to believe that, you know, that he was somehow saving the United States, and you now see this hate mongering, this apocalyptic demonization and scapegoating, you know, permeating the Republican Party, permeating the RNC themes, and it's, you know, Stephen Miller, the most powerful advisor in the White House, the top speechwriter, top senior policy advisor, is the man who is behind all of this.
All right, and we're gonna have a whole class on anti-immigration movement right now, and this doesn't even touch the surface of the horrific policies that they're pushing a lot of times behind the scenes. But it gives you kind of an idea of what's, you know, the intentions behind a lot of this. And then there's this new recent attack right now. So he's always looking for things to attack, like cancel culture, like, you know, like no one cancels people more than Trump. You know, he just canceled TikTok. You know, he organized a call for a boycott of Goodyear tires because, you know, they didn't let, you know, some employees wear Trump, you know, gear to work. He's just constantly trying to, you know, but yet that's not cancel culture. That cancel culture is anytime a marginalized person tries to point out, you know, a white person's complicity in their oppression. That's that, and then that's something like, you know. But anyway, so he's constantly looking for things to attack, and his newest thing right now is attacking anti-racism training. And our next class is all going to be about like the whitewashing history and this battle for our educational curriculum right now. It's been going on for over 100 years now. But it's, you know, it's super important because, I mean, he's actually pretty right on tackling this because, you know, this anti-racism, this cultural sensitivity, this, you know, racial bias trainings, critical race theory, all this stuff. I mean, this is a big threat to the Republican Party. It's a big threat to the right-wing media that is, you know, their fundamental tool is you know, it's misinformation. It's pushing this American exceptionalism that, you know, America has never done anything wrong, so why should we try to fix anything? You know, when in fact America's done a whole lot of things wrong and we're still dealing with those consequences, and we need to, you know, fix these things. And it has nothing to do with patriotism or anti-American. It has, you know, only to do with like fixing, you know, these problems. But anyway, Republicans, you know, love to attack this kind of stuff. As you're going to see in the next class, I mean, there's huge efforts. Like, you know, Arkansas, you know, Senator Tom Cotton introduced legislation called Saving American History that would prevent schools from teaching the 1619 curriculum that Hannah Nicole Jones, you know, curriculum that actually is like an honest approach at, you know, how this country was founded, more of a slaveocracy than a democracy, which is pretty accurate. But anyway, so, you know, in September 4th, you know, Trump issued a ban on federal agencies and essentially banned, you know, federal government from, you know, doing any kind of anti-racism training. And since then, it's called it, you know, ideological poison. It dissolves the civic bonds, left-wing indoctrination, you know, views every issue through a lens of race and all this stuff. And so this is from the actual ban that went out, and we called it divisive anti-American propaganda. It says all agencies are directed to begin to identify all contracts or other agency spending related to any training on critical race theory, on white privilege, or any other training or propaganda effort that teaches or suggests either one, that the United States is an inherently racist or evil country, or two, that any race or ethnicity is inherently racist or evil. So, I mean, this is something that's been happening, you know, since the end of the Civil War. We've been rewriting our history to basically, you know, maintain the racial hierarchy. Like, if you don't know I mean, if you know our history, then it's pretty obvious all the things that we need to do, to kind of fix, reparations and things like that. But if you don't know our history, then it's pretty easy to get you to vote for people like Donald Trump. And he's also called Howard Zinn, the person that wrote People's History of the United States. We'll talk more about Howard Zinn next class and just all he's done to kind of help, bring this what they call radical historians that came in the 60s that were the first people to, people have been challenging, like Du Bois and all these people have been challenging this Eurocentric whitewashed history. But, there's a whole movement in the 60s with Zinn, being a big one, a big historian, kind of challenging this stuff. But, I'm going to play this quick Democracy Now! Clip.
We end today's show with the words of the late historian Howard Zinn. On Thursday, President Trump lashed out at educators who teach about the U.S. history of slavery and racism, announcing a so-called patriotic education plan to combat what he called toxic propaganda in schools. Trump called the teaching of critical race theory a form of child abuse, lashed out at the 1619 Project, the Pulitzer Prize-winning series by the New York Times, which re-examines the legacy of slavery. Trump also directly criticized Howard Zinn during his speech at the National Archives Museum in Washington, D.C.
Left-wing rioting and mayhem are the direct result of decades of left-wing indoctrination in our schools. It's gone on far too long. Our children are instructed from propaganda tracks like those of Howard Zinn that try to make students ashamed of their own history.
So we're turning back now to 2009. Howard Zinn appearing on Democracy Now! Less than a year before he died. He just published Young People's History of the United States. I asked him to respond to a question he'd frequently been asked about his work. Is it right to be so critical of the government's policies of the traditional heroes of the country?
It's true that people have asked that question again and again. Should we tell kids that Columbus, whom they have been told was a great hero, that Columbus mutilated Indians and kidnapped them and killed them in pursuit of gold? Should we tell people that Theodore Roosevelt, who is held up as one of our great presidents, who was really a warmonger, who loved military exploits and who congratulated an American general who committed a massacre in the Philippines? Should we tell young people that? And I think the answer is we should be honest with young people. We should not deceive them. We should be honest about the history of our country. And we should be not only taking down the traditional heroes like Andrew Jackson, Theodore Roosevelt, but we should be giving young people an alternate set of heroes. Instead of Theodore Roosevelt, tell them about Mark Twain. Mark Twain everybody learns about as the author of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. But when we go to school, we don't learn about Mark Twain as the vice president of the Anti-Imperialist League. We aren't told that Mark Twain denounced Theodore Roosevelt for approving this massacre of the Philippines. No, we want to give young people ideal figures like Helen Keller. And I remember learning about Helen Keller. Everybody learns about Helen Keller. A disabled person who overcame her handicaps and became famous. But people don't learn in school, and young people don't learn in school what we want them to learn when we do books like A Young People's History of the United States. That Helen Keller was a socialist. She was a labor organizer. She refused to cross a picket line that was picketing a theater showing a play about her. And so there are these alternate heroes in American history. There's Fannie Lou Hamer and Bob Moses. They're the heroes of the civil rights movement. There are a lot of people who are obscure, who are not known. We have in this young people's history, we have a young hero who was sitting on the bus and in Montgomery, Alabama, refused to leave the front of the bus. And it was before Rosa Parks. I mean, Rosa Parks is justifiably famous for refusing to leave her seat, and she got arrested. And that was the beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott and really the beginning of a great movement in the South. A 15-year-old girl did it first. And so we have a lot of it. We are trying to bring a lot of these obscure people back into the forefront of our attention and inspire young people to say, this is the way to live.
That's Howard Zinn, appearing on Democracy Now! In 2009. Howard Zinn was attacked by President Trump on Thursday. The Zinn Education Project criticized Trump's call for patriotic education. The project tweeted, "So what explains the rebellions in 1676, 1680, 1786, and 1831, 1859, and more by Native Americans, enslaved Africans, coal miners, and more? Howard Zinn wasn't alive then," unquote. To see our full interview with Howard Zinn, you can go to democracynow.org, as well as all of our interviews with Howard Zinn over the years.
All right. And I really do think, I mean, like, if anyone's read People's History of the United States, it's his most famous book, or, the Children's History of the United States, the children's version of that. He's true to his word. Like, I mean, yes, he also talks about the real history of a lot of our founding fathers and a lot of our people that we whitewashed. But he also talks about tons of real of our real, what I would call real founding fathers, or our real heroes, the people that fought to open up. Our founding fathers created this white male Christian society, and everyone else didn't have rights. But over the centuries, people gave their lives, opening up our society to create more equality. And those are the real heroes. And Howard Zinn does a great job really capturing that. So I definitely recommend reading as many Howard Zinn books as you can. So next section, I'm going to talk about, Trump's favorite thing to say right now is his economy is the best economy in the world. That's his go-to, and a lot of people believe him as well. But we're going to kind of dive into these accusations real quick. So I'm going to play this quick video and then dive into some more resources.
The strong economy is central to the president's re-election message. In his narrative, he flipped a switch, ending the failed Obama economy and Trump era.
If we hadn't reversed the failed economic policies of the previous administration, the world would not now be witnessing this great economic success. The economy being the best probably it's ever been in the history of our country. I mean, it is the best it's ever been. The unemployment numbers are the best.
Truth is, the strong Trump economy looks a lot like the Obama recovery before it. Trump rode to the White House claiming the Obama economy wasn't good enough. Both a quarterly and annual basis, economic growth under Trump has not yet exceeded the best quarters of the Obama years. Growth last year at 2.3% missed White House targets. Trump's 2018 yearly growth of 2.9%, his best, that tied Obama's best year. The jobs market is strong, with nearly 6.7 million jobs added in the first 35 months of the Trump administration. But that trails the nearly 8 million jobs in the final 35 months Obama's tenure. Now, consumers are confident and stocks rose sharply again last year, but corporate investment has contracted now for 3 quarters in a row. The economy is just not as supercharged as the president advertised, and is not growing strongly enough to pay for the president's corporate tax cuts in 2017 and expanded government spending. Other similarities: both presidents deployed massive bailouts. Obama had the auto bailout, Trump a farm bailout twice as big. Both presidents setting new records for national debt, Obama for deficit spending to avert a depression, Trump to pay for a huge spending package and his tax cuts for business. But credit where credit is due. The president's exaggeration and hyperbole appear to be working. His approval ratings on the economy remain high.
For sure. I mean, that's his biggest selling point when you talk to if you ever talk to a Republican about, about all the horrible things Trump is doing, they immediately, first thing they say, but look at the economy. And this is really important because the economy, they sell this narrative that Obama destroyed the economy, and then that Trump came in and it's like a snap of fingers. I'll show you some charts. So, like, really within the first month or two, everyone's like, the economy's great. Look how great the economy is. In reality, it was Bush, at least on Bush's watch. We can argue how much he was a part of it, but Bush Jr., his presidency that destroyed the economy, and then Obama received this, basically a recession, and then through multiple, deficit spending and stimulus packages and whatever he could get through, at the time through Congress, which wasn't a whole lot, he was able to, kind of help recover the economy to the point where, look at this, like this is job growth, this was a recession, this Obama comes in power, and it's just like, record, destruction of jobs. And then through different policies, he's able to kind of build back up and actually build an economy that Trump, hasn't even come anywhere close from, doing it. But if you look at the polls, we're going to show you other charts. Trump basically inherited this thriving economy. And then he, at the same time, we're seeing that even though the economy is doing great, it's doing less great every year under Trump. And that's through a whole bunch of policies that, that he claims are helping the economy are actually hurting the economy. So, just give you a little background, like Obama actually set a record for the most job growth, consistent months of job growth in the history of this country, 75 months straight of job growth. No one's ever come close to that. Obama, started the unemployment rate, when he started was 7.8. In the middle of recession, it peaked at 10% in 2009, but when he left office, he had gotten it back down to 4.8. Obama had added 11 million jobs over, recovering, basically bringing us out of the Great Recession. And that's when, Trump ran on, it's crazy, Trump literally ran on a campaign that the economy's destroyed, and Obama's destroying it. And then immediately when he wins, he takes office, and all of a sudden, like, everyone thinks that he's fixed the economy. And his policies that he claims fix the economy are corporate tax cuts, trade protectionism, immigration restriction, deregulation, and the repeals of Obamacare. But if you look at, some of his biggest things he did is like tax cuts. So this is according to the Congressional Budget Office. So he did huge tax cuts that we're going to be paying, added like 1.5 trillion to our debt to pay for these tax cuts. But the majority of these tax cuts went to the rich. It significantly increased income inequality, and it basically, like, tax bill unfairly benefited high-income taxpayers and corporations at the expense of lower-income taxpayers. Delivered 84% of its benefits went to businesses and individuals with incomes over $75,000 a year. And then it did give a short bump, it did do, up to businesses for a little bit, but in reality, that bump went away by 2019. Before the pandemic, the economy was anemic at that time. So it didn't, they sold this idea that it would blow up the economy and it would eventually pay for itself, but it did not do that. And we're going to be paying for this for a very long time. It's basically a huge transfer of wealth to the upper class. So America's first trade protectionism, he sells this idea that we got to put America first, despite the fact that he makes like all his flags and stuff and his t-shirts and hats in China, and then just all kinds of other contradictions. But anyway, so America first, so he gets in all these trade wars, to try to make him, better terms for America, and enacts tariffs that, basically, end up, studies by the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office and Federal Reserve estimated that Trump's implemented and threatened tariffs would be paid by Americans. So he acts at tariffs thinking that, tariffs are going to be paid by China, but China, all they do is just raise their prices. So we're the ones actually paying for tariffs, which is just so ridiculous that we have a president that doesn't understand tariffs. Like, it can't, it's just insane. But not only does he not understand it, all of his voters who are listening to Fox News don't understand it anyway. So it basically just his tariffs cost us, a typical household, an estimate $580 to $1,280 per year, while slowing the GDP and income growth. And then Trump's trade war, farm sales to China plummeted from, billions of dollars. And he basically destroys our farming industry because they sell so much food to China. And then he has to initiate this massive bailout to basically farmers. So this is the guy, America first, capitalism, individual ruggedness, but then, let's get, instead of, let's prevent our farmers from being able to sell to China, and then let's just bail them out with this giant package. And so that, destroys our economies. Immigration restrictions have significantly affected, farm industries and construction industries. These are industries that rely, more than half of our farm workers are undocumented workers, and without them, we would not have the food that we have today. Like, we need these people, but at the same time, they use, when they crack down on them and politically escape them and start deporting them, not just criminals, but like anyone, like they would go hospitals and schools, and like it's pretty horrific. But at this, so all the farms, like California, are talking about they're experiencing 55% of their farms experience labor shortages, and it's costing a huge amount of money to these farms in our economy. Nearly 15% of the workforce in construction is undocumented. And that and National Association of Homeowners survey reported significant shortages of workers in 15 different construction trades. So even their immigration is hurting our economy pretty significantly. And then deregulations, I'll just read this one quote by Catherine Rampil. Consider a list of Trump's major deregulating efforts, many of which involve allowing companies to pollute more. Yes, there are a few identifiable isolated winners from this agenda. Like, imagine you run a company whose business model depends on dumping lead, mercury, or arsenic into water, pumping methane or fine particles in the air, or using pesticides that give kids brain damage. Sure, recently loose restrictions on these toxic activities might fatten your profit margins, but whether such policy changes significantly boost the overall economy is a different question entirely. And then Obamacare, he keeps on talking about Obamacare is destroying the economy, and he tries to repel it. But, the number of Americans without health insurance is constantly increasing under Trump. And now the fact that they're about to appoint a Supreme Court judge that has personally said that she's going to overturn Obamacare, we're going to see, millions of people lose their health insurance during a pandemic in a country where the number one reason for bankruptcy is medical bills. So just looking at his policies, like he's not good for the economy. But that's oftentimes, this is not just Trump. Oftentimes, the Republican Party is not good for the economy, but yet they sell themselves as conservative fiscal agents and care about the economy. But we're going to dive deeper into their platform and understand that that's really not oftentimes the case. So the reality, the majority of the economic growth that we're experiencing is a continued trend from Obama's presidency. There was this analysis by Bloomberg News at the end of Trump's second year, when he starts talking about he's got the best economy in the world, and then that analyzed is this massive study. You can read about it. And they found over the last 7 presidents that Trump's economy is this, the 6th best one out of 7. So there's only been one economy worse than Trump's economy in the last 7. So he really, even though he's selling this idea and everyone's buying it, it's so far from the case of that he's good for the economy. And there's just countless studies from, he's the unemployment rate from Obama reaches, 2010, 10%, and just see, Obama, bring it down, and then it's just a continuation. And this is COVID. And I'm not going to, COVID's a whole nother story, even though he did, his politicization of COVID, definitely destroyed our economy even worse than it was going to. But we were always going to experience some kind of badness. So we're going to avoid the COVID and give him at least a little bit of benefit of doubt. But then we look at, job gains, blows up in 2014-15, and then is on a steady way downward. Same with U.S. debt, Obama does deficit spending that causes debt, but then with a healthy economy, Trump is still raising the debt. Middle class income, black employment, U.S. wages, stock market, it's all just a continuation. Gas prices, manufacturing outputs, all this stuff, is a continuation. One thing that he is doing, more of is kicking people off of health insurance and off of food stamps. So that is a significant, thing right now. But if you look at, all these, figures, it's just Obama's economy was way better than Trump's economy. But the fact that this is a great study about opinions on the economy. So this is in 2016, October, while Obama was still president. This is how everyone, there's a huge amount of Trump voters that consider the economy horrific. And then in March 2017, just a couple months later, all of them are okay with the economy. While we look at, people that support Clinton, you don't see any difference, because really the economy hasn't changed a whole lot since then. So you really just see this false perception of Obama had a bad economy and Trump fixed everything, which is just a complete lie. And then I really like this quote, because we talk about the economy and these big numbers, but really, like, the economy, especially under neoliberalism, it's not what it seems. So I like this new rule. It's not a booming economy when real wages are lower today than in 1973. Nearly 80% live paycheck to paycheck. 62% of jobs can't support a middle-class life. 140 million Americans are either poor or low income, and half of older Americans have no retirement savings. So a lot of of what gains that Trump is touting, it comes from, like, stock markets and corporate gains, and there has been an enormous amount of wealth being transferred up to the top, the upper class, and that can seem like GDP's up, everyone's benefiting. In reality, we're drastically increasing income inequality in this country. And then so we just recently this week we learned that New York Times got a hold of some Trump tax documents, and it's pretty disturbing. We found out not only did he not pay so Trump has been, like, for a long time, refuses to release his documents. He gives some BS story that he can't because he's under audit, which is not true. He can totally release his documents. But he claims he pays all his money, but then we find out that he's paid next to nothing. 10 out of 15 years. And since 2000, he hasn't paid taxes. In 2016, when he became the president, he's only paid $750. He's had numerous failed businesses. He's in constant debt. This is the scary part. Like, the tax thing is insulting. It's messed up, especially since he's, like, politically scapegoated marginalized populations, like undocumented workers who actually voluntarily pay billions of dollars of federal taxes every year. They actually contribute more than this guy, but and this is also a common thing. Most billionaires don't pay much taxes. They're the real takers, despite this narrative that the poor people are taking everything. But the scary part of this is he is somewhere between $500 million to $1 billion in debt, and most of those debts, a lot of the are going to be due in the next couple of years. So if he wins office, he's going to have to figure out how to pay these massive amount of debts while being the most powerful person in this country. So it's crazy. And so you look at some of his deductions, like, $70,000 worth of hairstyling per year, all different kinds. Like, he deducted all this money for, he made Ivanka Trump a consultant, at the same time being a Trump org employee, which is super illegal. So I'm just going to play this clip that's going to talk a little bit more about this.
Lawrence, this is why the American people deserve to have a full accounting of the financial interest, including the indebtedness of the President of the United States. And I do share in that concern. Who does he owe the money to? Tell us, who do you owe the money to? And do you owe debt to any foreign nation? Do you owe, do you owe debt? Do you owe money? Let's just be clear about what debt means. You owe somebody money. Do you owe anybody money who is impacted by any decision you make as president of the United States? We need to know that. The American people have a right to know that when the president of the United States acts, he acts with their priorities in mind, not with his priorities in mind. And we've already known that he puts his political priorities in front of the American people. But we are now seeing, in a way that is evident, clearly evident, that he also is prepared to put his personal interest ahead of the American people by not disclosing who he owes money to. And apparently he owes a lot of money, maybe to a lot of people, and we should know.
And this is just one more example why you really don't want to get on Kamala Harris's bad side. Here she takes aim at Trump in the aftermath of the bombshell report out of the New York Times, where it was discovered that in 2016 and 2017, Trump only paid $750 in federal income taxes per year, and paid literally nothing in 10 of the 15 years prior to that. And that would already be damning unto itself, that Trump is a cheat who's contributed nothing to society, not to police or the military that he so desperately panders to, not to firefighters, not to first responders, not to teachers or roads or bridges. Donald Trump will squeeze everything he can out of society, but offers nothing in return to actually contribute. But what Kamala is talking about here is Trump's personal debt, millions of which would come due in a second term, and how that would create a massive national security risk. The Times reported that Trump has at least $421 million in debt coming due, although other publications have estimated that number to be between $500 million and $1 billion. And if Trump is president when these payments come due, it begs the question, What could he do as president to alleviate his own personal debt? Keep in mind, the federal government doesn't even give security clearances to people who have significant debt for that very reason. That because they're vulnerable as a result of that debt, they may act in such a way that's intended to alleviate that debt for themselves personally and not in the best interest of the country. The same applies to the president, meaning that while he's supposed to be operating in the best interest of the United States, he may be making trade deals to benefit those who hold his debt. He may be launching strikes on the enemies of those who hold his debt. He may allocate aid or disaster relief or any funding at all based on those who hold his debt. Think about it. If, I don't know, let's just say Russia holds Trump's debt, do you think he'd be tough on them? Probably not. Not even if they were actively interfering in our election. Not even if they placed bounties on our soldiers' heads. Oh, those things actually happened? And Trump did nothing at all in retaliation? Weird, huh? So when Kamala Harris and the rest of the world asks about who Trump owes debt to, it's not just to embarrass Trump over his taxes. We already knew he was a con man. We already knew he was a cheat. We already knew that he would go to the ends of the earth to avoid contributing to society, just like he's done for years, from stiffing contractors to dodging the draft to forcing taxpayers to cover his weekly golf trips. But this is bigger than Trump being scummy. This is Trump being a threat to the national security of the United States. And bear in mind, this doesn't have to be a partisan issue, and it shouldn't be. Americans on both ends of the political spectrum should at least find solace in the fact that our elected officials are working in our best interest as a country and not in their own personal interest because of any outstanding financial trouble they may be in. And given what we know, not only from Trump's taxes, but from his absolute desperation to keep them hidden, he's not exactly quelling any of our concerns. So before you cast your ballot, ask yourself who you'd feel safer with as president. Joe Biden, who owes money to no one and is a contributing member of society, or Donald Trump, who's indebted into the millions by shady sources that he's hell-bent on protecting, with those debts coming due over the next few years. So yeah, take all the time you need.
All right. And then now I want to, kind of end this section talking more about Trump's, response to the COVID crisis and the pandemic. This is probably, it's hard to argue, which things are to rate things that how horrible it is. But again, I want to remind that we have 4% of the world's population and almost a quarter of the world's death from COVID. And a lot of people will say, oh, this is going to happen regardless, or they try to blame China. But in reality, I mean, we knew this was coming, and instead of preparing, instead of working, initiating plans, Trump administration basically politicized this. And we should play this quick video and then talk a little bit more about it.
We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China. We think we have it very well under control. We pretty much shut it down. Coming in from China. In April, supposedly it dies with the hotter weather. When it gets warm, historically, that has been able to kill the virus. People are getting better. They're all getting better. And the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero. It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear, and you'll be fine. They're going to have vaccines, I think, relatively soon. Not only the vaccines, but the therapies. Therapies is sort of another word for cure. You're talking about very small numbers in the United States. Our numbers are lower than just about anybody. It's really working out. And a lot of good things are going to happen. And we are responding with great speed and professionalism. It's going to go away. Yeah, no, I don't take responsibility at all. It's going to all be great. We're going to be so good. This came up, it came up so suddenly. This is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic. All you had to do is look at other countries. The coronavirus, you know that, right? Coronavirus. And this is their new hoax. We're 15 people in this massive country. And because of the fact that we went early. We could have had a lot more than that. We're doing great. Our country is doing so great.
And I think that a lot of people have talked about how this was that Trump just didn't know any better, or he doesn't know what he's doing, or this, or he couldn't, he didn't listen to the right people. But and then this new book just recently came out that basically, where we the author, I forget the name, but we'll hear about it. Basically did all these interviews during this time, and Trump, basically according to these interviews, basically knew exactly what he was doing the whole time. He was very intentional about covering it up, and as he was helping it spread all over the country. So I'm gonna play this quick clip about that as well.
Back in February and March, Donald Trump was very confidently saying that the coronavirus was not a big deal, and it was basically just like the flu. But since then, we've all learned that that was bullshit. Well, today it's come out that Trump privately knew that it was bullshit.
Stunning breaking news. President Trump, in his own words, making clear he knew about the dire threat of the coronavirus very early on, at a time he repeatedly told the American people they were safe. He deliberately withheld information from the American people, repeatedly concealed details about the gravity of this threat because, in his words, he didn't want to create a panic.
It's a very tricky situation. It goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. This is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. So this is deadly stuff. I think, Bob, really, to be honest with you,
Sure, I want you to.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes,
because I don't want to create a panic.
You didn't want to create a panic? You didn't want to create a panic? So what did you want? For people to very calmly be dying in the streets? What's wrong, buddy? I'm dying. But it's chill. And also, since when is Donald J. Trump concerned about creating a panic? That is literally his favorite thing. Cities are burning, suburbs are collapsing, caravans of Antifa Mexicans are committing Muslim voter fraud. His campaign slogan is basically, look out behind you. But yes, thanks to audio tapes of interviews Trump did with Bob Woodward back in February and March, we now know that he was fully aware of how the virus was transmitted and how deadly it could be. And yet in public, he told everyone there was no reason to be afraid. And look, I get that as a leader, you don't want people to panic. But you also want to inform the people so that they can be safe. You know, if a plane is crashing, a pilot will tell you to remain calm, but they'll also tell you to fasten your seatbelt and brace for impact. If Trump was a pilot, he'd be like,
attention all passengers, everything's fine. Seatbelts are for snowflakes. And if you want to stretch your legs, now's the perfect time. Bye-bye.
And this is really confusing, because at first, I thought Trump was too stupid to understand what was going on with the virus. But it turns out that he was actually smart about it in private. But he's also stupid enough to tell Bob Woodward on tape. Now I don't know what to think. And Trump aside, am I the only one who thinks it's crazy that people keep releasing books where they reveal that they've known the most incriminating things about Trump, but they only tell us about it now? I mean, imagine if Paul Revere had this attitude. Are the British coming? Find out by pre-ordering my book on Amazon. So, Trump purposefully obscuring the threat of COVID-19 was the major revelation that took over the news today. But remember, Bob Woodward interviewed Trump 18 times for this book. And he recorded Trump on tape talking about plenty of other subjects too, like racism. And believe it or not, it turns out that in private, Trump is a lot more aware of racism than he acts like in real life.
Do you think there is systematic or institutional racism in this country?
Well, I think there is everywhere. I think probably less here than most places, or less here than many places.
Okay, but is it here in a way that it has an impact on people's lives?
I think it is, and it's unfortunate, but I think it is.
Whoa. Somebody finally got around to watching Get Out. It really is interesting how private Trump seems to know a lot more than public Trump. I mean, this whole time, I thought there were going to be secret tapes of Trump saying the N-word. Instead, we got secret tapes of him being an epidemiologist with a PhD in critical race theory. And you might be thinking, oh, but this is good news, Trevor. It means that Trump isn't as dumb as we thought. No, this is terrible news. Because you know what it shows? It shows you that Donald Trump is willfully misleading the public. It reminds you that he's a con man. He lies about coronavirus to protect his economy and his re-election. And he ignores systemic racism because he knows it exists, but he does it to protect his image with his base. And then when all the bad stories pile up, what does he do? He tries to drown them out with some crazy news announcement, like him saying that he's going to appoint Ted Cruz to the Supreme Court, which, to be honest, just sounds like a threat to the Supreme Court. So once
All right. And I think that that's super important. Like he claims that he didn't want to cause a panic, but you have to remember that at the time, it's nothing to do with panic. He was literally telling people, he was telling seniors to continue flying. He was telling people not to wear masks, and it was like refusing to role model masks. These are all things that he knew at the time it was airborne. He knew it was dangerous to fly. Just so, I mean, it's complete bullshit to say he didn't want to cause panic. He wanted to, save his economy. He wanted to save his reelection. I mean, there's one thing if you want to cause a panic, but you still tell people, to maybe, to wear things like masks. Like wearing masks is not going to cause a panic, but at the same time, they scored a lot of political points. A lot of anti-mask rallies, a lot of support for a Republican Party came from that. So it's just, it's insane. It's really crazy. So let's look at Trump's COVID responses, because really, when we say that Trump is literally killing us, this is not exaggeration. I mean, we have to. I mean, like I just point out just a handful. These are just a handful of things that he's doing right now. When he fully knew how dangerous COVID was, and fully knew how bad it's going to be. So in March and April, Jared Kushner was in charge of the federal pandemic response, and they actually came up with this really great nationwide response plan. Vanity Fair did a really great article on this. He said, rather than have states fight each other for scarce diagnostic tests and limited lab capacity, the plan would set up a system with nationwide oversight and coordination to surge supplies, allocate test kits, lift regulatory and contractual roadblocks, and establish a widespread virus surveillance system by the fall to help pinpoint subsequent outbreaks. So this is a really good plan. I mean, this is a major issue. Like states were all fighting each other for scarce resources of masks and ventilators. When the federal government could have came in and actually streamlined it and sent it to the places in most in need, which was supposed to be this plan. But then, according to several people in this team, they decided not to do the plan because the first states hit by the coronavirus were Democrat states, were like Seattle and Washington State and New York, and so they literally thought, that this would be politically harmful to the Democratic governor. So they decided to scrap the plan and just let the states kind of, fight on their own, which is insane. Like, I mean, they should be in jail for this. Literally, this is the problem is like we disconnect the responsibility of all the people that died during this time period. And they need to be held responsible. In April, U.S. Postal Service was actually going to have this program where they're going to send out 650 million masks, to basically the states that are being hit the hardest at that, in April with COVID. This could have been huge, instead Trump found out about it and stopped it, saying one official saying there was a concern from someone in the White House Domestic Policy Council, in the Office of Vice President, that households receiving masks might create a concern or panic. So again, because the anti-mask narrative really, it was more politically beneficial to Republicans. And then, CDC, the Center for Disease Control, people are supposed to give us guidance and bring us plans. Trump is constantly working to undermine them, constantly, opposing the guidance that they give out, constantly forcing them to post bad advice, like don't wear masks, constantly, discouraging people from getting tested. A big one was like, oh, if you don't have any symptoms, don't get tested, when we know that, there's a huge number of people infected are asymptomatic and don't have symptoms, but are still spreading it around. So it's just, crazy what they're doing with CDC. And then, Trump refused to centralize the COVID equipment purchases. So you have like states that are doing bidding wars on eBay for ventilators, basically, paying an insane amount of money for the few scarce resources. You got people like, that are, flying in, like the Boston, New England Patriots use their jets to fly, masks in from other countries. Like Maryland bought a bunch of masks from South Korea and test kits. But the federal government's going in and taking it all to restock their supplies. So states are literally hiding their stockpiles of masks, away from the federal government, which is insane. I mean, the federal government should be the main people buying stuff at reasonable prices and then distributing it across the state. The CARES Act, one of the relief packages, gave $1 billion to our military with the purpose of Trump was supposed to authorize the Defense Production Act, which would force U.S. companies to start manufacturing products such as masks and ventilators and things, and that money was supposed to go into implementing those policies. And instead, they used it, to give it to defense contractors to create jet engines and body armor. $1 billion that was supposed to go to mass production went to defense contractors. And meanwhile, there's a huge shortage of masks and personal protective equipment all over the country right now. And then the last thing, the Paycheck Protection Program, which is part of these COVID relief packages that was supposed to give people who who didn't lay off workers compensation, keep people employed. And they fought really hard to keep any kind of accountability out of this program. And eventually they were forced to start releasing names, and what they found is like 75 public traded companies that make billion-dollar companies are receiving hundreds of millions of dollars who don't need this money. They found 6 hate groups, white nationalist hate groups, anti-immigrant hate groups that were receiving millions of dollars from these personal paid loans. And they found an enormous amount of fraud, and this has because all the stipulations that the Democrats try to attach. They try to have all this oversight. The Trump administration, they said they would refuse to sign these bills unless they got rid of a lot of this stuff. And yeah. And then, so this is a parody video. It's called Honest Government Ad. It's by Juice Media. It's just a quick video. Again, this is a parody. It's comedy, but I'm not playing it to get a laugh. I'm playing it because it's pretty accurate when you actually dive into what the administration's doing and their policies and how they're responding to the COVID. This is pretty, in my opinion. So you can argue with me, but in my opinion, this is basically exactly what's happening right now.
Hello, I'm from the U.S. government with an update on our pandemic response. In the space of just a few months, our "don't worry bro, it's just the flu" policy has gotten a shit ton of you killed. Some say this tragedy was inevitable, but actually, studies show that if we'd simply responded like other governments who listen to scientists instead of Chuck Woolery and the My Pillow guy, we could have prevented almost all of those deaths. Unfortunately for you, the amount of responsibility we take in doing our job comes to approximately fuck all, which is why we got more of you killed than 50 9/11s. Trump 2020. With a president like this, who needs terrorists? As part of our distract from how many of you were getting killed policy, we'll be telling you the real threat to America is minorities demanding not to be murdered by cops. And to make you feel safe, we've deployed a secret police force to kidnap people off your streets without probable cause. Some call that taking a dump on the Constitution, but we call it law and order. Thanks to all the well-armed militias cheering us on as we literally do the one thing the Second Amendment was supposed to prevent. What's that? People are looting in the streets. Oh, darling, the real looting is the one we're doing right here. As part of our exploit this crisis to funnel wealth from the poor to the rich policy. Like, remember when we told you COVID was no big deal so we could buy ourselves just enough time to sell up our personal stocks before the crash which we knew was coming? Or when we passed the biggest bailout package in history, which funneled shit tons to corporations and easily forgivable loans. We even gave billions to churches bankrupted by sex abuse scandals. Even the I Love Small Government Rand Institute got some of the loot. But hey, don't forget that single barely above minimum wage check we sent you. The one you simply handed over to your landlord to pay the rent, who in turn handed it to a bank to pay their mortgage, which is how we laundered another $1 trillion to banks through the working class. Profits made, profits kept. Now millions of you face homelessness, and 1 in 5 families are going hungry. But look on the bright side. Billionaires regained $500 billion of their wealth. We're not in this together. If you survive till November, be sure to re-elect us so we can get the rest of you killed in the looming climate and extinction crisis. That other crisis we're ignoring and plan to profit from obscenely at your expense. Trump 2020. Fuck you. Of course, we realize that after lying to you, robbing you, and getting your loved ones killed, some of you might be contemplating not voting for us. But don't worry. That's why we've adopted our deregister millions of you policy, as well as our close polling stations, file lawsuits, and let's spread bullshit about voter fraud policy. And if that's still not enough, well, maybe we'll just cancel the election. Trump 2020. Now get back to work, America. Our stocks won't make themselves go up, you pieces of shit. God bless America, except Portland and Chicago. Authorized by the Department for Sacrificing School Teachers to the Great Bull God to make line go up.
All right. Again, that was a parody. It was a comedy skit, but nothing they said was not true. And that's the cold reality. I mean, they just described every one of the policies. Not everyone, but like everything policy they described is an actual policy that Trump and the Republicans and the political right are pushing right now.